Actually, I was told to speak a little while ago. So I went to my room to prepare for what I would say. And even before I could prepare, I was asked to come and speak. So pardon me if what all I speak seems very disjointed to you. But nonetheless, they tentatively asked me what the talk should be titled. And I had suggested Second Republic without thinking much. What I actually meant was that this coming of the BJP in this election is like the beginning of the creation of the Second Republic. Before I go any further, I'd like to make a disclaimer. Neither am I a supporter of the BJP. Never have I voted for the BJP, including in the current election. And possibly in the future also I may not. But one thing is sure, the win of the BJP in this election has changed the entire scenario. In my opinion, the Congress party was not defeated only because it was burdened by the anti-incumbency of the last 10 years, but also because there was an anti-incumbency that it had to face for being in power for the last 60 years. Most of the last 60 years was won by the Congress. In other words, what this mandate could bring about is a fundamental change and in many of the things that we have taken granted in the Republic of India. Hence, I use the word the Second Republic. This election is, of course, not a revolution in that sense, and therefore a second republic can't be created overnight. It'll be like a goods in the works, which might take many, many years to complete. Also, India as a nation has its own history, and there will always be a continuity from the past, as was even when India became independent after 100 years of British rule. But one thing is clear, the BJP has now become the primary pole of Indian politics and is expected to be so for the next 10-15 years. And therefore, I shall not be surprised if the party gets re-elected to power after 5 years. Of course, you might say, how can we make such a prediction? Well, we can't. But one thing I'm sure is that Mr. Modi will create such conditions that his government is not evaluated after 5 years by commonplace things like food grain prices, the number of jobs he created, etc., etc. Such things, we always in our conversation talk of these things, whether the prices will go down, whether he'll create enough jobs, etc., etc. But he shall try to make more fundamental changes. In other words, he's going to change the story. And therefore, you as voters and I as voter, when we try to evaluate him, he would have done enough from his point of view, which would appeal to a large section of the electorate. Before that, another disclaimer, the Indian electoral system is defective, we all of us know. The BJP got into power with only 31% votes. The Congress has also been in power for many, many years with 35 to 40%. And the highest that any party ever got as percentage of votes in a parliamentary election was in 1984 after the assassination of Srimati Indira Gandhi, when Rajiv Gandhi had got 49% of the votes. But with those 49% votes, he was able to get 415 seats out of 545 in Lok Sabha. In other words, there is a fundamental disconnect in the electoral system, which is called the first past the post system. The winner takes it all is the system. So even so long as you get a block of votes, which is the largest and much more than the others, then you get a disproportionately large number of seats. So so therefore, when I say that BJP shall work hard and possibly remain the primary pole of Indian politics, it is in this context. The 31% vote that the BJP got this year has enabled to get 285 seats. So this is in this context that I speak. Before we go any further, I think we should speak a little bit about, see how the party has grown since its inception as Jan Sangh in 1951. The Jan Sangh was started in 1951 by Shyama Prasad Mukherjee. He was reflected the cause of the Hindu refugees, or more specifically, the Hindu refugees in Bengal. He was very much concerned that the Hindu refugees from Bengal were being thrown out from East Pakistan and they were not getting justice in India. And he felt that Nehru's approach was one of appeasement to Pakistan. And therefore he started the Jan Sangh. He himself, as you know, was a minister in Nehru's cabinet. He was the Minister for Industry and Rehabilitation, I think. And he quit and formed the Jan Sangh. But he died shortly thereafter. He founded the party in 1951. He died in 1953. But not before taking up the cause of Kashmir. And he died in detention in Srinagar. After his death, the party got taken over by the RSS, and there was a fundamental change in the party. But the first major areas where the party could make inroads was in Delhi, UP, and Madhya Pradesh. There's a reason for that. In Delhi, people believe that it became a party of refugees. But that's not correct. Only certain types of refugees got attracted to the Jan Sangh. And who were those? These were people from Punjab and all who were adherents of the Arya Samaj there. The other refugees who had come there who were not adherents of the Arya Samaj remained to be very much Congressis. The Arya Samaj was founded, as you know, by Dayanand Saraswati, who was a Gujarati. And though he brought social reforms in the Hindu religion, he talked about going back to the Vedas and doing away with ritualism. He was very aggressive. He also propagated that Muslims should get reconverted into Hindus. And so his Hinduism was very much on the face. The party also could not make any inroads in Punjab for the simple reason that Mr. Saraswati had talked against the Sikh gurus, and therefore he never found favor with the Sikhs. In UP also, it is due to the efforts of the Arya Samaj. People like Deen Dayal Upadhyay and Mr. Atal Bihari Vajpayee had all been members of the Arya Samaj or had studied in Arya Samaj institutions. And in Madhya Pradesh, the party grew because of the influence of the RSS, which was headquartered in Nagpur, which is now in Maharashtra, but then in Madhya Bharat. But in those days, there were not many adherents of the Jan Sangh. And what I'll tell you might surprise you a bit, because largely the Hindu population thought that the Congress party reflected their aspirations better. In other words, what I'm trying to tell you is that the Congress was very much a Hindu party in those days. And if you want an example, in 1961, there was the first communal riots in India which broke out in Jabalpur. And we find that after some time, Mr. Jawaharlal Nehru rushing to Bhopal and telling his congressmen why they stood inert when the Hindus were attacking Muslims. He was saying, you guys went into your house and remained there as if in burqa. In other words, though this concept of so-called secularism was there ingrained in the minds of Nehru and a few people like him, down the line, the Congress netas were very much Hindu netas, and there was not very much to distinguish them with what the Jan Sangh stood for, or even what a party like Hindu Mahasabha stood for. In fact, a lot of those Congress netas in those days had crossed over. A good example is a gentleman called Meher Chand Khanna, who was responsible for rehabilitation of Hindu refugees in Delhi, who was himself a member of the Hindu Mahasabha in Pakistan and had crossed over and had joined the Congress party. That is one reason why the Jan Sangh couldn't grow much, because the Jan Sangh was promoting the Hindu cause very aggressively. But the Congress party was itself a party of Hindus. The break started happening when caste politics started. When certain sections of the population started questioning the Hindu-ness of the Congress, they thought that the Hindu-ness of the Congress was nothing but reflecting the aspiration of the Brahmins and the upper castes. And the first break, as you know, came in South India, in Madras state, which is now called as Tamil Nadu, where the Dravidian movement took over and they attacked Hinduism, where they were attacking basically Brahmanism. And in fact, through the 1920s and earlier, you had the Justice Party and all. So that was when the Hindu vote, the so-called Hindu vote, started breaking down. And things came to a head by the early 1990s when Mr. V.P. Singh became the Prime Minister, and then we had this rise of OBC politics. Till all these days, the Jan Sangh was struggling, and it found its moment of glory only during emergency, after the emergency, when it was accepted as part of the Janata Party by Jayaprakash Narayan. As all of us know, the Jan Sangh was linked with the RSS, and therefore it was treated as untouchable, because a lot of people in the country believed that the RSS had been involved in the assassination of Mahatma Gandhi. However, Jayaprakash Narayan, after going through all the documents which were supplied to him by Lal Krishna Advani, declared that RSS had nothing to do with the assassination of Mahatma Gandhi. And therefore, he accepted the Jan Sangh as part of the Janata Party. But as you all know, the Janata Party itself broke because of the question of dual membership of their erstwhile Jan Sangh members, who also insisted on being RSS members simultaneously. When the Jan Sangh broke, it metamorphosed it took rebirth in the form of the Bharatiya Janata Party. And Mr. Vajpayee, who had come to a prime position then, thought that Gandhian socialism will be their way. But this, of course, showed no results, as you know. After the assassination of Mrs. Gandhi, when the elections were held, the Bharatiya Janata Party could win only 2 seats, one in Gujarat and one in Andhra Pradesh. Therefore, it was realized in the BJP that if they have to survive only as a Hindu party. Because otherwise, the Congress party will get all the votes. Because as you all know, Mrs. Gandhi was taken as a strong leader, but she used to visit temples, etc., and therefore was perceived by a lot of people in the country as a strong Hindu leader. So therefore, a lot of Hindu votes used to go to her. And even Mr. Vajpayee had declared that she was the reincarnation, she had compared her with goddess Durga after she dismantled Pakistan in 1971. So the Bharatiya Janata Party realized that if it had to get better of the Congress party, it had to be seen visibly as a more Hindu party. And that's what is the genesis of the Ayodhya movement. We all know what happened after that. Once in power, of course, Atal Bihari Vajpayee had to do exactly what the Congress party was doing, but reflecting the mores of the BJP, he went ahead with the nuclear testing of the in 1998, which, as we are told, in 1995 was something that Narasimha Rao was also preparing, but he had been advised, quote unquote, by the US government to stop that testing. After the Gujarat riots of 2002, again, there was a tussle with internal conflict within the BJP between the hardliners and the softliners. And Mr. Vajpayee, who was actually, had his ideal, whose ideal was Jawaharlal Nehru in his liberal mode, found it difficult to continue with Narendra Modi. And the showdown between the hardliners and the softliners took place in this very state of Goa. And as we all know, that he continued to be in power and Vajpayee was snubbed. In 2004, the BJP lost the election, though their performance was none too poor. It was believed that all the minority votes had consolidated against the BJP. By this time, I would imagine that the minority votes would have been around 13–14%. And as I talked earlier about the system of elections in India, first past post the system of elections, which requires only 30% block votes to bring you to power. So if you have got 12, 13, 15% minority votes going behind the Congress, to get another 15% is none too difficult. And this is the reason why the Congress party got 2 terms in power. So now this time, of course, the BJP played smarter and they came to power. Now that they are in power, what are they going to do? First of all, as I said, the Congress was defeated because of the anti-incumbency of 60 years. In other words, Narendra Modi was very smartly able to use and conduct an election where he not only portrayed Rahul Gandhi as a weak leader, but he also attacked what he saw as the establishment, quote unquote, establishment of the last 60 years. What is that establishment? That establishment is Nehruvian philosophy, the Nehruvian consensus, as many people call, the Western press meaning the English language press, and any other things that he defined. He said, this is the establishment. So he portrayed himself as a have-not attacking the haves, and these were the haves. Now he's in power, so he's a have. So now you have demolished an establishment, so you have to create your own establishment. Therefore, I don't agree with people who say that there will be total continuity in policies. Because to be in power, he has to create his own establishment. What is that establishment going to be? We have no clue, but we have indications. In the Sangh Parivar pantheon, there is no leader who can match up to Nehru. So what will they do? So they will borrow a leader from the Congress and weave their story around him. Who is this leader? This leader is none other than Sardar Patel. Sardar Patel, a lot of people in the country believe, deserved to be the Prime Minister of India, but he was he was passed over in favor of Nehru. But he is seen by people as a Bismarck, as the Iron Man, who integrated these 550 states in the country with great gusto and zeal. And India today is India because he was able to integrate these 550 princely states in the way that he did. He also differed strongly with Nehru in his cabinet meetings. And one matter on which he differed violently was the issue of Tibet, which had annexed by the Congress, or which had been annexed by China, and Nehru meekly surrendered to that. But Patel did not agree to it. Of course, we don't know how Patel would have shaped up in the next 10 years, because he died shortly thereafter in 1950. And the fact that we lost a humiliating battle to China in 1962 only proved that Nehru's policies had not been all that robust. So, also the fact that Mr. Patel was the man responsible for recreating and reconstruction of the Somnath temple, the oceanfront Somnath temple of Lord Shiva in Gujarat, is also responsible for some of his popularity, at least in the western state. The BJP says that this temple, which had been destroyed many times during the medieval era, the reconstruction of this temple, which by the way was much against the wishes of Pandit Nehru. He did not wish the government of India to be involved in this reconstruction, is also shown as evidence of his great nationalism, that of Sardar Patel. So Sardar Patel is the man who the BJP will build, and Modi will build his new ideology. And if you really want to see it, that is why he is creating a statue of unity of Sardar Patel in Gujarat, for which 200 crores have been allocated in this budget. As you all know, this statue will be 182 meters tall and will be one of the largest, if not the largest man-made structure in the country, not in the country, in the world. It will stand double the Statue of Liberty in New York. What is the point? In Nehru's India, unity in diversity was the theme. When Mr. Modi says it will be a statue of unity, what does he say? It says unity shall be the theme of the country. Nobody will disagree with it. There's only one problem, that unity without diversity, does it work for a country like India? I don't know, but the BJP's policy is that of cultural nationalism. What is cultural nationalism? Cultural nationalism says one country, one nation, one country, and total unity. Does it allow for heterogeneity? We don't know. Which is why a lot of these BJP leaders, like recently we heard some minister from Goa saying that even Christians are Hindus. But I suppose not every Christian will agree that he's Hindu. The term Hindu is used here in the context of India. But in the second republic that Mr. Modi will try to create, let me tell you, this business of unity will be far more stressed upon than was during the Nehruvian era. Most of the people of the country will also not disagree, because they will say, yes, India is hemmed by neighbors like Pakistan, etc., which are constantly working to destroy India, and then we've got a range of international forces also arrayed against us. So these are some of the things that we'll do. So you'll see a greater manifestation of this nationalism, increase of the military might. In concrete terms, what he will do, we don't know. But of course, we shall take some steps. For instance, I'm sure that he will try to take steps such as, say, sending back the Pandits of Kashmir who have become refugees back to Kashmir and all such things. In other words, we shall see the story will be based on the basis of the strong India. One of the fundamental things about strong India, the BJP believes, is a strong rupee. But the rupee is very weak, as you know, because of three reasons. One, 80% of our petroleum is imported. Two, we are importing huge amount of gold. And we are also importing other small items. So I don't know how they will do it. But what I am trying to say is this vision of India will be based on unity, on creating a stronger India and of a monoculture. Whether this will work or not, I don't know. But this is the second republic that will be sought to be created. But I can tell you that the Congress party cannot come back to power because they'll have to have their own story. They cannot continue with the story of the Nehruvian era. They'll have to have a different narrative, which they don't seem to be having. So I can safely say, within 2 months of the BJP coming into power, that using their narrative, they shall possibly win the next election also. In other words, the BJP will remain the primary pole of Indian politics possibly for 10 years. Thank you.